Hello, my name is Connor Ian Smith, and this is Immigrants and the United States Labor Market, a discussion of the U.S. economy through the lens of wages and skill distributions. Though my family immigrated from Cuba in 1958, I can't just talk about them. We'll need to look at mass immigration over several decades. First, however, let's set the scene a bit with some immigration history. Everyone has heard the phrase, a nation of immigrants, but doesn't realize how deep that actually goes. The natives Columbus stumbled upon in 1492 were actually the descendants of people from Asia 15,000 years ago. Even today, almost everyone has at least one foreign-born ancestor. Some families have likely been in the United States for over 100 years, if not longer. They could have immigrated during the first mass immigration from the late 19th century up to the 1930s. This group reached numbers of nearly 20 million, with almost 80% being from European countries. The majority of these people came as asylum seekers escaping the persecution brewing in their native countries. Today, however, you can hardly tell they're here, having almost completely lost their immigrant roots. The second mass immigration, however, after World War II, brought similar numbers as before with Hispanic origins. This group, however, contained both political and economic refugees seeking asylum or better opportunities. Not speaking English, they had a much more difficult time acclimating to American culture and can still be seen today. Overall, United States immigration has been on an upward trend with almost 44 million immigrants representing 14% of total population. It's easy to understand why immigration is so hotly debated in economic rhetoric. Like most economic immigration discussions, this one will begin the same, with wage differentials, convergence, and assimilation. These three concepts tend to go hand in hand. Wage differentials are fairly obvious, being the difference in pay between natives and comparative immigrants. Convergence is the idea that immigrant wages grow faster as they assimilate to American society, eventually equalizing with native wages. This concept is widely contested among economists, with some like Barry Chiswick in favor. Chiswick's 1978 analysis showed that after 30 years, immigrant wages would overtake native wages. This optimistic appraisal relies on assimilationist views. These assimilationists argue that immigrants were more highly motivated to work longer and harder than non-immigrants. Further research, however, claimed that this perspective is too narrow and that immigration waves were inherently different from each other. This difference is obvious in the Miami Cuban immigrants of the 50s and 80s. The first group were asylum seekers escaping the Cuban Revolution. They tend to be upper-class socialites, mostly wealthy and well-educated. Those of the Mariel boat lift in the 80s, however, were economic refugees from the lower classes. They came here seeking better job opportunities. This flew right in the face of the assimilationists and favored the skeptics. One skeptic was Harvard economist George Borjas. This table makes it clear that later cohorts fared far worse than their predecessors. This emphasized that current market conditions of immigrants from decades earlier cannot predict wages of those newly arrived. This research, however, still ignored the effects of agglomeration and regional convergence. Americans tend to be quite mobile in terms of responding to economic opportunities, though not enough due to migration costs. Immigrants are able to locate in areas that give them the highest income, having already chosen to bear the cost of migration. This sort of income maximization can lead to long-run growth through wage equalization in regions where labor supply reaches equilibrium. In spite of this, people are still wary of immigrants. They often claim that foreigners are stealing American jobs. Multiple studies have found, however, that though native wages did go down, the change was negligible. Most reported that for a 10% increase in the number of immigrants, native wages only dropped by a couple of cents. But despite that fact, and some research even claims slight increases, the skeptics still argue that employment was significantly lower. Some studies were conducted on the effects of immigration on native employment, only to reveal almost identical results to those of the wage studies. The same 10% increase in immigration only caused a 0.01% fall in employment for most native groups. Even the sudden massive upsurge of labor supply from the Mariel boat lift caused almost no change to Miami's native wages and employment. A recent study conducted by Spanish economist Juan Lull came to different results, however. His work revealed a nearly 5% wage drop for blue-collar workers. However, after factoring in changes to one's human capital, Lull revealed almost 2% wage increases. This research actually puts a positive spin on immigration effects that is usually only observed in theoretical modeling. One such model by Manish Pandey and Amrisha Chowdhury claimed that changes in both skill distribution and labor force size needed to be considered when determining wage effects. Skill distribution alone would lead to the conclusion that low-skilled wages drop, but with the compensation from labor force size decreasing prices, real wages for low-skilled workers increased between 2 and 4% for California and New York. This study concluded with an examination of how the United States would fare employing a skill-selective immigration policy similar to Canada's. Were the United States to adopt such a policy, real wage increases to low-skilled workers could range from 7 to 9%. Now, this isn't to say that the United States doesn't attract any high-skilled immigrants. That percentage of total immigration is just much smaller. In truth, that statement is inaccurate. Though the low-skilled labor force is larger, the high-skilled is still a fair size. The 2014 American Community Survey reported that almost a third of immigrants hold a PhD in some STEM field. Most of the research goes as far to say that this percentage is only slightly less than that of natives. Silicon Valley Studies companies took these numbers one step further. They found that over 25% of Silicon Valley companies had a foreign-born founder. In total, these companies took representative of over $5 billion in sales and almost 500,000 jobs across California. The reports claim that these foreign-founded tech companies represent a staggering share of U.S. job creation and economic growth. In addition to their founders, the majority of Silicon Valley companies' labor force is also foreign-born, and most because of the H-1B visa. This is a type of work visa that specifically caters to foreign people with special skills. Since the creation of this visa, studies have indicated a potential correlation to the increase in STEM employment among both natives and immigrants. Specifically, the increase in foreign STEM employment causes a cycle of labor force growth. Agglomeration effects dictate that the mere presence of high-skilled immigrants leads to future migration of similar labor to said region. This is one of the reasons for Silicon Valley's continued job and wage growth. Another reason is actually the United States itself and its educational strength in STEM fields. Most data shows that immigrants represent a large percentage of STEM students who are then groomed for labor forces like Silicon Valley. This leads me to the conclusion that immigration doesn't only play a significant role in the U.S. economy, but that the reverse is also true. Thank you.